Coming up, moral philosophy in a new epoch in business.
I think that's the era we're in, that we've gone from connected to interdependent to morally interdependent. We're asserting our humanity, and we need to live it.
LRN founder and CEO Dov Seidman discusses a reshaped corporate and political world driven by values and authenticity. It's just ahead on Global Ethics Forum.
We're here to talk with Dov Seidman. Dov is the CEO of LRN, which is a global firm that helps companies navigate regulatory and morally ambiguous issues and helps them do that with a stronger and stronger sense of the values that they bring to their work. He's the author of, in its second edition, Why How We Do Anything Means Everything. Bill Clinton wrote the foreword and says that this new focus on shared responsibility, shared benefits, and shared values will require all of us to think about the how of what we do. You've said that you came of age in the era of just do it, and that shaped your world, and you discovered moral philosophy as a calling around that time. And so talk about those two poles, if you will. Where were you and how did you end up on this path?
We tend to romanticize our past, but there are probably two life dots that I can connect to give you a sense of why I had this kind of set of convictions and passion to take things that people have kept apart in business, principles and profits, and really see that they not only belong together, but they must be in a reinforcing relationship. And let me go back to first grade. I grew up learning disabled, reading. You mentioned a book that I've written. I didn't read a book until I was 17. And in fifth grade, I remember being in class like this was yesterday. I looked around and all the students were in the story. It was a fascinating story. But I was petrified to read out loud, so I went to the ceiling and I tried to figure out the formula. When is this teacher going to get to me? And I started to experience life in the moment and always on the ceiling of life, figuring out the human dynamics. Who else is suffering in the class? Who else is scared to read? And I just became very situational, really just trying to understand the dynamics around me. And I believe that that's when a passion for the human condition and why people are the way they are and why they're treated the way they are started. And then fast forward to applying to college. I went to UCLA, but I at first did not get into UCLA. Every Saturday for about 3 years, my friend Ruben and I washed Lionel Richie's cars. And I mentioned Lionel Richie because he's popular again these days, but we waxed his cars. Remember the Karate Kid, wax on, wax off? So I did this every Saturday for 3 years to pay for college. And UCLA admitted him and not me. So I wrote UCLA a letter saying, you've taken my friend, and I plead hardship. Please admit me so I can keep washing cars with my friend Ruben. And they said, we will under the condition that you enroll in remedial English. Because I didn't get 1,000 on the SAT. I got a 970 in the SAT. I practiced for another 6 months, and I moved my score dramatically all the way to a 980 from a 970. And here I was in remedial English. And if ever a seeming curse would turn out to be a blessing, here's what happened. I tried to get into history, shut out. Poli-sci, every easy class, so to speak, was taken. But the one class that was open was the moral philosophy class that intimidated everybody else. So I enrolled in moral philosophy. And philosophy rewards you for reading just 10 pages in a thoughtful, deep way, and history for skimming 500. So I would have flunked history. And here I was in a moral philosophy class, and I felt at home. The questions of right versus wrong, the questions of social justice, it just felt like my entire life was at that moment. And a love affair with ideas, with the process of thinking and rethinking fundamentals, a love affair with asking questions, a quest for the truth, ignited in me a passion for learning. And I think that learning to read and write and reason was literally a byproduct of this engagement with philosophy.
We originally began talking about this when you came to Strategy in Business and said, I'd really like to do an article on the fact that companies are changing. They have been oriented to just doing it, they haven't been paying attention to values. And now that's changing. They are no longer going to be rewarded for poor behavior.
Yeah.
And I expressed some skepticism about this. And sort of scrolled down the list of let's say the first 10 companies on the Fortune 500 And didn't really see any there that were noted as, sort of the most human or oriented or the highest value, the most enlightened organizations one might find. First of all, can you pin down a corporation as being moral or not moral, ethical or not ethical, high value, low value? Can you really say that a corporation is one of those things? And then how do you know? How can you say that they really are moving in a better direction?
The lens I look at companies, who is endeavoring to do the right thing? Who is endeavoring to not just proclaim their humanity, but to translate that proclamation into practices and leadership behavior? So my lens is who's for real. And those companies are for real if they get the world they're living in. And I spent some time in Los Angeles, so I tend to look at society through the lens of movies. And if we take morality and ethics out of it for a second, let's look at it through the lens of ideas. Milton Friedman said the only responsibility that a corporation has is shareholder return, so we focus on profits. Classical economists tell us that man is purely rational. So it's not an accident that a head of sales is just going to use carrots and sticks in a compensation plan to motivate or coerce the behavior of a sales force. Bosses said, just do it. And I think that the one movie that really stuck a chord in me is The Godfather. Remember the famous scene when the Tessio character is about to be carted off to be murdered for the attempted murder of Michael Corleone? Think of the idea that came from that scene. On his way to being murdered, he had the temerity to stop and say, please tell Michael I always liked him. It's not personal. It's just business.
Just business, nothing personal.
And I went to funerals growing up, and I heard that he was a jerk at work, but a loving husband, and a caring father, and a ruthless negotiator. If we can create an amoral space where it's just business, or it's just politics, or in a football locker room, say at Penn State, it's just football. If we can create this space, then it's rational in this space to say greed is good, that's a rational strategy, just do it, my way or the highway, and have a zero-sum approach. But if we start to realize what the moral philosopher David Hume warned us several hundred years ago, that the moral imagination diminishes with distance. If there's no distance, we can't take our morality and park it over there. We need to reawaken it because we all live in a crowded theater where we don't get to do what we can or can't do. We have to do what we should do. And I think that we're going from an amoral world where we scaled institutions based on amoral ideas of rationality and let's build corporations that are more machine-like, to a world where we are not just connected or interconnected, but we're ethically and morally independent, where every day we see examples of how we're rising and falling together. Where one,
you mean interdependent?
Interdependent, where one banker can lose $2 billion for his bank at trading at his desk and wipe out bonuses for all of his colleagues, where one vegetable vendor in Tunisia can spark a revolution towards freedom throughout the Middle East. We've never lived in a time where we have democratized to the individual the power to be a source for good or the opposite, evil. And the individual is so powerful that today I am sitting with CEOs of some of the companies that you're mentioning, and Art, you know what one of them said to me? He says, Dov, I'd like you to help me with a unique problem. I've been thinking that it took them 17 days to get rid of Mubarak, and he had a military. What if my consumers or employees want to toss me out of here? How should I lead? Should I rethink how we operate this company? And CEOs never used to ask these questions, which totally have morality at their core in terms of getting the right answer.
Let's say leaders' behaviors, all of our behaviors, are in fact changing for the better. Why is that happening?
Virtue has been and always will be its own reward. And I think we live in a time where it's become more practical, if not fashionable, to be principled. You can't manage your reputation. You have to earn it one behavior at a time because it precedes you on Google before you show up anywhere. There are all these practical reasons to do the right thing. What worries me is that when people discover that it's practical to be principled, they start to be Machiavellian about being principled, meaning I'll say I'm sorry because people won't sue me. And then you get sued because the lack of authenticity shines through. We grew up at a time where we had a boom and bust cycle every 10 to 20 years. And if I know that I'm going to have a bust and it's going to be 1 year of pain, then it's like I'm in a storm and I'm going to bring down the sails and I'll be resilient and I'll batten down the hatches and I will be in survival mode. Because then I'm going to enjoy 10 years of prosperity. And if I knew that I was going to have a crisis every 10 to 20 years, I don't really have the incentive to change fundamentally. You know, you sue a few people declare bankruptcy, you live through a little regulation like Sarbanes-Oxley, and then we're back to growth and prosperity. Now CEOs have a 1-year budget, and by April there's a Greek bond crisis, then there's a tsunami, then there's a Gulf oil spill, then there's this, and then there's that. If you have a crisis every 10 weeks or every 10 days, you finally have an incentive to do the following. Before, we were resilient for a year and innovative for 10. Now we need to be resilient and innovative simultaneously. And the only thing ever invented that does double duty, that can socialize and control against crisis and unwanted consequences, and simultaneously propel us towards good and advantage, are values.
So companies which embody values, where everything that people do is kind of socialized towards being enlightened, good-hearted, conscious of the consequences for everybody involved, not just the shareholders, but the customers.
Yeah.
Trying to make great stuff for great customers and have great relations with great employees and be great neighbors. Companies which embody that are actually doing better, or at least that, and say a little bit more about that.
So what we've done recently in our work is we've invented what we call how metrics, literally the ability to not measure how much resource, but how resourceful. I mean, think of what happened to Netflix. They were measuring how much, as in how many subscribers. And they felt that they are so powerful because they're adding subscribers by the dozens every other second. And they felt that they were so powerful that they can pass a price increase. And 800,000 subscribers bolted in 48 hours because they weren't able to measure how deeply they were connected to them, i.e. how loyal. But what we've tried to do recently is look at the forces that shape the behavior of organizations and their people. And in our work, we basically came across two types of organizations. One is we call informed acquiescence. They're very rational. They're about command and control. People are informed in terms of what's expected of them. They're about success, functional, lots of departments and rigid hierarchies.
They're fair and open, but they're rigid.
Fair and open, rigid. We know these organizations. And the other organization is what we call self-governing. They're rooted in values. The leadership model is connect and collaborate. They're much more about trust than just checks and balances as applied against rules. And what really differentiates them is that they are really rooted in a purpose-inspired mission. We've done an independent study, first of 5,000 people in the US and now of 18 countries and up to 36,000 employees in 18 countries around the world. And there's good news and bad news. The bad news is that only 3% of companies are self-governing. The good news is that if you are, you have much less misconduct. And when you have misconduct, people are not scared, so they come forward and talk about it so you could do better. But more importantly, remember what I said about double duty? Much higher levels of innovation, receptivity to new ideas, customer satisfaction, employee loyalty, et cetera, reputation, and all these are leading indicators of financial performance, which we've also seen that it's reported at much higher levels in a self-governing organization. So in many ways, through an independent analysis, we've proven that you can create enduring value from values if you can scale the values by embedding it into your DNA. If we haven't noticed, Chevron is the human energy company, Cisco is the human network, Dow is the human element, Deere is human flourishing, Delta Airlines is talking about how 1 ounce of humanity is stronger than 5 tons of steel, and Allied Bank is we speak human, and Manpower is the human age. One company after, and I can go on, but one company after another is declaring their humanity.
And
now,
they have different ad agencies too.
Different ad agencies. Now, marketing is always a harbinger of where the puck is going. Wayne Gretzky said, skate to the puck. But we used to assert practicality. We used to say, buy from us because of price or great products, et cetera. That's table stakes. When the competition is reverse engineering you, not in 6 years, but in 6 days, you need a great product or services to stay in business. And the marketing agencies are saying, to their companies that they work with. Let's at least tell the world that let's have a relationship because of who we are and what we stand for. In some companies, and this could be tragic, this might stay confined to their marketing departments. Other companies are going to think deeply about the world we're in, and they're going to translate that proclamation into corporate practices and leadership behaviors. And I think that's the era we're in, that we've gone from connected to interdependent to morally interdependent. We're asserting our humanity, and we need to live it. And I think that, let's watch over the next 10 years, but I'm predicting that we are going to see a new type of innovation. What I mean by that is, we ask human beings to create innovation. So we keep humanity constant and we say, show me the new product, the new service, the new pricing model. I call that human innovation. We're going to flip that. We're going to start to see innovation in humanity. We're going to see companies trust their employees in new ways and get returns like never before because we are going to innovate in how we lead and how we organize ourselves. We talk about a jobs crisis. I think we have a careers crisis. 7 out of 10 employees today are not engaged on the job. And 2 out of those 10 are actively disengaged, meaning they're subverting their company. So instead of 7 out of 10 people running to work and creating jobs through their innovation and extra effort, creating jobs for their brothers and sisters and cousins, we've created environments where people are playing in the shade. They're barely alert to the opportunities to contribute more fully. And until we start to create organizations that inspire people, we're not going to have just a jobs crisis. We're going to have a careers crisis where people don't feel like they're building an enduring life and legacy that matters.
Do you think that the United States could be able to put together a sort of a moral Washington consensus that could go and be cascaded into the, morally needy countries?
Could it happen? Yes. My sense is that in this globally interdependent world that we're in, I don't think any one country is going to be the purveyor of morality for others. I think what we're going to start to see, I talk about 2 types of values. There are situational values, where every marketplace or company creates rules and policies to regulate the situation. And that's where you see the proliferation of rules. And we saw that situational values didn't get us anywhere. Situationally, if I can sell you a mortgage because I'll never see you again, I'll do it because I can, especially if that mortgage gets packaged with 1,000 others and gets sent halfway across the world to be part of some big sovereign fund, et cetera, et cetera. The more interdependent the world gets, and the more the behavior of any one person can affect others, the more I think we are going to shift over to what I call sustainable values. And sustainable values are the most deeply human values. They allow for human relationships, and we know what they are. Trust, truth, honesty, integrity, shared responsibility. And I think that we're going to see that the world is a small place, and those who scale sustainable values are going to create either marketplaces or companies where people have the confidence and trust to invest their life, their career. And I think that's where it's going to go. And you're going to see the innovation on who can scale sustainable values. And I think one of the things that our research showed, and by looking at 18 countries, is even though you need to respect diversity and particularity of different countries and societies, at the level of freedom, at the level of dignity, respect, truth, etc., it's universal. And the only way that I've been able to connect the dots between Tahrir Square and Occupy Oakland and Occupy Wall Street, etc., is to realize that wherever you are around the world, everybody today wants freedom from something. Freedom from a dictator, from an oppressive regime, and people also want freedom from a micromanaging boss, and people want freedom from being a little cog in a corporate machine, and people want freedom from being in a box in a big corporate org chart. People want freedom. The problem is to create freedom from space. That requires tearing things down, getting rid of dictators or flattening organizations. And that's happening at unprecedented levels. Companies don't have 15 rungs on the ladder anymore, they're all getting flatter. So we've never seen so much creation of freedom from. But the freedom that really counts, autonomy, freedom to pursue happiness in our constitutional tradition, freedom to collaborate with people halfway across the world. Freedom to always requires moral foundations. Freedom to requires shared values, and freedom to requires principles. And I think that we sometimes celebrate too early. We create freedom from and we think we're done. And as leaders, we haven't yet done the hard work of creating freedom to. And I think that's where values come in.
And I've heard morality, I've heard ethics, I've heard self-governing. I haven't heard the word laws yet in this entire talk. And I was wondering how much change is actually possible, no matter how moral or ethical corporate leadership is, when meanwhile maybe non-moral, non-ethical leaders are pushing laws that are making it more and more difficult for citizens to express either freedom from or freedom to, which I think is what gave rise to the Occupy movement.
I'm a recovering lawyer. After 7 years of studying moral philosophy, I did go to law school. We take moral principles and we give them legal status. It's not about law versus morality. It's about rules versus values, because there is morality in law. Now, I have never worked with a company that has a rule that says, don't forget to breathe, because people naturally breathe. What happens is that we pass rules retrospectively. Something happens, and we don't want to see that thing happen again, so we regulate it. So the rules that we pass are as good as our memory of history. They regulate the human past, but they can't propel the future we want. And I agree with you. We have an albatross of rules inside companies and in the marketplace that we're trying to navigate in a world in which two values can inspire me to navigate infinite situations, and 1,000 rules will just suffocate me. So I think if we were starting over again on a desert island, I'd say no rules. Law is fine, i.e. giving moral principles the status of law, that law is above man, that we don't want to be governed by monarchs and kings and micromanaging bosses and all that. So I would give morality legal status in our lives. But I wouldn't translate morality into a rule for every situation, because that's the same as scaling situational values in that way. And I think that we need to start sunsetting and getting rid of certain rules. And it starts with cafeterias. You go in and there's a rule that says don't leave the food in the microwave. So I see people leave it on the counter. Why not just teach people respect for common spaces? I mean, we've got to get back to what I think it was Teddy Roosevelt who said that if from lawlessness or fickleness we refuse to govern ourselves, then in the end we will be governed from the outside. So if we're not values-based, if we're not bringing self-discipline to our endeavors, we're going to see more and more regulation. Because what else can you ask of a legislature? They can't legislate morality. They can only pass laws and regulations in the form of rules. They're not allowed to say, here's a moral principle that you must follow in that way. And I think it's in our tradition with Thomas Jefferson. Everybody thinks that he was a libertarian because he said that the government that governs least governs best, i.e. small government. He was a philosopher. He went to say because people discipline themselves. And I think it's always going to be a choice. The more values-based self-discipline we have, the fewer external rules and policies and regulation we will need. And if we are anemic in this area, we're going to see more and more of that. And I think right now we're way out of balance.
I was just wondering, since values are so important all around the world globally, and we're so interconnected and everything, how much conversation is there going on about this issue internationally?
That's a great question. And when the crisis happened, there were basically two camps. There were leaders of government and of company CEOs who used the following three words. We need to reboot, we need to reset, and we need to reform. And basically, that's code for I pretty much like the system the way it is. Let's reform it, make it a little stronger, a little Dodd-Frank, a little this and a little that. And then there are those who realize that we're in a new era. And Einstein said to us, don't use thinking from a prior era if you believe you're in a new era. And those people want to rethink, not just reform. And they're prepared to rethink fundamentals. What is the nature of a company and society? How do the private and the public sector work together better for the first time? I am more optimistic because more people in power are prepared to rethink fundamentals. And that includes saying, doesn't morality and ethics belong in business? Not as a tax, not as a burden, but as your engine. And I think at international conferences, we're seeing the discussion of sustainability. What is sustainability? It's a moral ethic. Your relationship with a colleague is either sustainable or not. With your grandchildren and future generations is sustainable or not. Instead of sustainability being about recycle bins over there in the corner, sustainability is an ethic. You can do anything sustainably or situationally. So the minute you use the word sustainable, I see that as morality. Because the only reason to do something on a sustainable way is if you think you have moral obligations to the present and the future. So sustainability is a proxy for people who want to go beyond creating a machine that makes money in that way.
And please join me in thanking Dov Seidman.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.